Good evening. Thank you to the Board of Education for having us here tonight to present the results of your June 30, 2022 audit. All districts in the state of Michigan are required to have an audit conducted annually on their financial statements. We have performed the audit of the district's financial statements in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and in accordance with government auditing standards. As a result of our audit, we have issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest form of assurance that we can provide that the district's financial statements are fairly presented. Also included in the financial report is a footnote describing that the district was subjected to bond compliance requirements, and our audit procedures include evaluation of those requirements. We did not identify any compliance issues with the costs that we selected for testing. In addition, as it relates to the audit, we did not identify any audit adjustments. We encountered no difficulties in performing the audit, and we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. As it relates to the second item I mentioned, the federal programs audit is a separate audit performed over the district's federal grants received. This is a compliance-based audit to evaluate whether the grants selected for testing complies with federal rules. The current year audit had elevated risks associated with the significant amount of emergency response grants that the district received and has been deployed by the federal government over the last couple of years. Namely, this was ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 in the current year. As we get into the graph presentation shortly, you'll be able to see the impact of this increase in funding, which is now in year 2 of these programs. I'm happy to report that we have issued unmodified opinions on the 2 grants that we selected for testing: the Education Stabilization Fund, which contains your ESSER programs, and the IDEA or Special Education Cluster. There were no findings or question costs complying with the federal requirements, which is an outstanding accomplishment.
How many years have you worked for Plante, Moran, Jennifer?
I have been there for 22 years.
And how many years working with Chippewa Valley schools? About how many do you think?
About 15 years. So what I've seen is that over the last decade or so, the district has really made meaningful strides at increasing fund balance to get to a spot where it has determined to be an appropriate level to be able to make strategic decisions and not be reactive to different things that come up. I wanted to congratulate the district and thank Mr. Sutherland, Ms. Jacobs, and the business office staff on a successful and smooth audit. This was another challenging year for the district, and the district demonstrated continued focus on integrity and accountability in financial reporting, and receiving unmodified opinions with no findings is something to be proud of. I will now turn it over to Laura Tack, who will provide an overview of the financial results.
The primary focus of this presentation is going to be the general fund, which is the primary operating fund of the district. First, we'll focus on general fund revenue for the year. As you can see, total revenue and other financing sources is approximately $180.2 million. It's important to note that $15.6 million included in this is related to the 147C MIPSR's rate stabilization. This funding represents funding provided by the state to offset the net cash outlay required by the districts for retirement. This is included in retirement expenditures and is required to be directly remitted back to the retirement system. As a result, this $15.6 million does not represent funding that the district can decide what to do with. You'll see the largest component of general fund revenue is state revenue at 69.5%. The next largest category is other state, local, and interdistrict sources, which includes amounts received from the ISD for special education, as well as other various state categoricals. Federal funding comprises approximately 15% of general fund revenue, with approximately 11.6% specifically related to COVID funding. We're going to take a look at the specific COVID grants later in this presentation. If we take a look at general fund revenue year over year, we can see that revenue is stable from 2021 to fiscal year 2022. However, you will see a slight shift in the categories that make up this general fund revenue. First, you'll see that property tax category decreased from 7.8% in 2021 to 1.4% in 2022. And you'll also see that the other state, local, and interdistrict sources decreased from 15.6% of general fund revenue in 2021 to 12.7% in 2022. This relates to the implementation of the new Student Intervention Fund, with the impact on the general fund being a smaller amount of property tax revenue and enhancement millage revenue. The Student Intervention Fund is now part of the Cooperative Activities Fund, which is not included in this graph. Finally, you'll see an offsetting increase in federal COVID funding, increasing from 4.2% in 2021 to 11.6% in 2022. Moving on to general fund expenditures, we can see that total expenditures and other financing uses in 2022 is $179 million. This graph breaks down the primary functional areas of the district. We can see that instruction is the largest category of expenditures, representing 78%. This directly relates to classroom and classroom activities. The other main categories are operations at 12% and administration at 8%. Again, it's important to note that included in this total amount of expenditures is the $15.6 million of the 147C MIPSers, which is the expenditure offset to the revenue that we discussed earlier. If we take a look at the general fund expenditures year over year, we can see again that expenditures are similar and stable from 2021 to 2022, with an approximately 1% increase in expenditures year over year. However, again, like revenue, we'll see that some of the categories have shifted. If we take a look at 2021 as compared to 2022, we'll see that instruction decreases from 80.5% in 2021 to 78.4% in 2022. And we see that operations increases from 11% in 2021 to 12% in 2022. This change reflects the difference in the district's operations from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22. In 2021, due to COVID, the district was operating under a hybrid model, with some in-person instruction and some virtual learning. However, in 2022, the district was able to bring students back into the classroom and function in an in-person learning environment. With students returning to the classroom, there are some necessary operational expenditures that come back into play, such as transportation and building maintenance. So that's why we see this shift a little bit in these expenditures from year over year. This slide continues our analysis of the general fund expenditures by comparing the district's actual expenditure breakdown to the statewide percentage breakdown of Michigan districts. Now, it is important to note that this statewide percentage is based on 2021 data because this is the most recent statewide data available. If we take a look at these graphs, we can see that the district emphasizes instruction, again, those classroom and classroom-related activities, as the district is structured to spend 78% of its expenditures in 2022 on instruction, compared to the statewide average of 73.7%. This allows the district to spend comparatively less of its expenditures on other categories such as administration and operations.
What's most compelling about that graph is that there's a substantially different and increased focus of instruction and instructional support services by Chippewa compared to what the statewide average spend would be. So it articulates that Chippewa has a higher priority placed on direct instruction costs and spending your resources in the classroom.
This slide provides some numbers to make the previous slide a little bit more tangible. So again, what we have on the left here is the district's actual expenditures for 2022. On the right, this graph indicates what the district's expenditures would look like if the district was operating under the same percentages for categories as the state. So we can see here, again, the district's commitment to instruction, as Chippewa spent $140 million on instruction in 2022, whereas if it were using the statewide average, it would spend $132 million on instruction. And we can see also the efficiency in operations, as the district spent $14.7 million on administration in 2022, compared to the $17.5 million it would be spending if it were operating at the statewide average percentage.
It's been exceptionally challenging in this environment. In the last decade, the state funding on a per pupil basis, which is the largest source of revenue that the district does receive, those increases were fairly nominal.
Would you say it was less than inflation?
Yes. with, escalating costs of the district structures and all districts in the state of Michigan, it became challenging to financially get to a place of stability when you were receiving very little in increases. We've seen that change in the last couple of years, but it has been a challenging time.
Now we're going to take a look at the specific COVID-19 relief funding provided by the federal government. As this chart demonstrates, the district has received a significant amount of federal funding related to COVID relief since 2021. Looking at this graph, on the left-hand side, you see the specific grants received by the district, as well as the grant periods, which show when these funds were required to be utilized. This blue line for each of these grants indicates the total amount awarded, and the orange line indicates the amount spent to date. As of June 30th, 2022, the district had utilized approximately 95% of its total COVID federal funding. As a result, beginning in fiscal year 2023, the general fund will see a much lower percentage of its revenue relating to COVID-specific federal funding. While it has been a significant benefit to the district to receive these funds, the non-recurring nature of these grants has required the district to implement a very thoughtful and deliberate forward-thinking plan for the use of these funds. This has allowed the district to ensure that it does not use these funds for costs that would eventually burden the long-term cost structure of the district. Now that we've discussed the revenues and expenditures, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to discuss the fund balance.
The largest component is people costs. You're a people-focused organization, and so with salaries and benefits in particular, those costs have continued to increase at a pace that was higher than that per pupil dollar funding that you got from the state, which again is the largest driver of your revenue. So trying to keep pace with increasing expenditures when your revenue is not able to keep pace at the same rate creates some challenges, which is where fund balance comes into play to help balance the two of those. So taking the results of the revenues and expenditures that were covered on the previous graphs, we can discuss what the impact is on fund balance. The beginning fund balance for the general fund, July 1st, 2021, was about $32.4 million. Revenues exceeded expenditures slightly by about $584,000 in the current year, which brings the ending fund balance down to about $32.9 million. A common metric that is utilized to examine fund balance is taking the fund balance as a percentage of the general fund expenditures. And so at June 30, 2022, this was 18.36% compared to June 30, 2021, where it's just slightly lower at 18.22%. Another common metric that is looked at is to evaluate how many days the district could operate with the fund balance that it has. If the district were to cease receiving any revenue, the district could operate for about 67 days with the fund balance at June 30th, 2022. The next graph takes a look at general fund balance over a 10-year horizon from 2013 to where it landed at June 30th, 2022. On the right-hand side, you see those results at $32.9 million. Over the time horizon presented on the graph, fund balance has been steadily increasing. The next graph continues to look at general fund balance, but looks at that common metric that I mentioned of fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. And this provides more perspective in terms of where the district's fund balance is. So over that same period from 2013 to today, we see that since 2016, this percentage has been pretty consistent within about a percentage point, coming to where it is at 18.36% at June 30, 2022. And what this continuity over the past 5 to 7 years shows is a strategic dedication to having fund balance as a percentage of expenditures be consistent, and that shows that there's stability in the financial system.
What can you say to the community to indicate that our district is in a strong financial position, and why the community should be, happy about that?
So there's a couple things that point to this from a numbers perspective. There's an analysis in the slide presentation that we have that shows fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. And this is really one metric that's used to kind of gauge that financial health or stability. And when we look at that ratio over time for Chippewa, we've really seen that that number has been pretty consistent over the last 5 to 7 years. And what that conveys is that you've really placed a focus on consistency and keeping things stable so that you can be strategic and focus on your longer term goals, and having to not make rash decisions because you've got consistent amounts of fund balance to work through different challenges. We've had a lot of challenges in these last couple of years here. The other thing that I look to is the statewide average for fund balance. And so for June 30, 2021, which is the most current data that we have, that number was 19.3%. And Chippewa is at about 18.3%. So pretty in line with what we're seeing across the state. Again, indicative of strong financial health. The final graph that we have to present is general fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, but indicating what it was countywide. So it indicates all of the districts in Macomb County with their fund balance as a percentage of expenditures as of June 30, 2021. Again, that's the most recent data that is available. In the middle of the graph, we have highlighted in red also what the statewide average is, which was 19.3%. Again, just to provide some perspective as you look at Chippewa compared to other neighboring districts within the county. We thank you for your time tonight, and we welcome any questions that the Board of Education may have.
Thank you. Jennifer, she's a very important partner from Plante Moran, and we see her every year and multiple times every year. Thanks for what you do for making us such a wonderful district. Thank you, Jennifer.